Welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Lindsay Ernst. I'm an Associate Director of the Center for Comparative and Public Law, and it's a great pleasure to me today to be able to have Sam Dubberley from Amnesty International joining us. Sam is the founder of the Digital Verification Corps, which involves training, supporting, and guiding students in doing digital verification and human rights investigation online. So it was a great pleasure last year when I met Sam, and he asked the students at the University of Hong Kong to be part of the consortium of schools. The schools that the DVC, I'll refer to the Digital Verification Corps as the DVC, and the schools that the DVC brings together are Berkeley, Cambridge, Essex, Pretoria, Toronto, and HKU. So after Sam speaks today, we also have Herion and Yuki in the back, and Mozilla, I don't know where, oh, there's Mozilla. Herion and Yuki are with HKU, and Mozilla is here for the next 6 months. She was a program manager for the DVC at Berkeley. So we're pleased to have all of them here today, too, to share with you their experiences working with the DVC. So thank you all for being here, and thank you, Sam.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Lindsay. So it's a great pleasure to be here again. I think this is the third time I've been here in about a year. So I'm starting to have favorite places to go in Hong Kong, which is really wonderful. But most importantly, it's wonderful to be here and receive the welcome of the law school at HKU yet again. It's been a real pleasure and a lot of fun working with everybody here over the last year and seeing it like the HKU students become involved in the Digital Verification Corps and really do some amazing work. So my name's Sam Dubberley. I am based in Germany, in Berlin, although I'm British. So I hope to be based in Berlin after the 29th of March, but let's see where that will happen. And I work with Amnesty International. I've been at Amnesty for the last 3 years. I was brought in to set up what we've now called the Digital Verification Corps, which I'll talk a bit more about as we go on through my presentation. My background, though, is in broadcast news, in journalism. And it was through journalism that I became interested in the impact of social media on how professionals today do their work. And I was working in newsrooms. I've been working in broadcast newsrooms since the Iraq War in 2002, basically was when I started, and saw over between 2002 and when I left journalism in 2013, a drastic and very rapid shift from traditional reporting methods where a camera person would go into the field and film an event and come back and you'd have one version of that event, to what we see today, or what we saw during the Arab Spring between 2010 and the Syrian conflict up until today, of multiple versions of events being posted online and on social media. And obviously this has brought huge power to people. We've seen in the last 2 weeks have been huge protests in Sudan, in Khartoum, where we can actually see today how the Sudanese authorities are repressing peaceful protest through violent means. And we can actually use those tools and social media tools and the content that people are posting online to actually hold the government to account, to stand up to Bashir and say, hey, Bashir, we know what you're doing. You can't actually hide what you're doing anymore. Obviously, that comes with huge challenges, and I'll talk about some of the advantages and the challenges through my talk. The challenges being, what happens if we get it wrong? What happens when we as Amnesty or a news organization as the BBC or CNN puts out a video or a photograph that actually isn't from the event we're told it's from, and what's the risk of that? So I'm going to talk a bit about all of those and introduce you a little bit to the DVC, and then take you through a case study of how we actually go through some verification, and then talk about some of the challenges as we go forward. How do you want to do questions? Should we save questions to the end, or? Yeah? Probably the best way to do it, isn't it? Yeah? So if you do have questions, I will obviously leave time for questions. So we'll kind of try and do a round of questions at the end. I promise not to talk for too long. I think it's much better for everybody. So often, I kind of whittle on using terms that I assume that everybody understands, but most people then look at you blankly in the face going, huh? So actually, what do we mean by open source investigation, and why does Amnesty actually care about it? So when I talk about open source information, for instance, we're looking at anything that's freely available online. So that can be, open source information has been around for a very, very, very long time. Indeed, Amnesty International, back in 1967, he says, was founded on the back of open source information. Peter Benenson, the founder of Amnesty International, saw in the Observer newspaper reports about Portuguese students who'd given a toast to freedom, who were then arrested by the junta, the military government in Portugal at the time. And that led to the founding of Amnesty International. So we can say that Amnesty International was founded on the back of open source information. Okay? So public records, anything that's available, newspaper articles, databases. Sweden, for instance, has the oldest open source information law going back to the 1800s. Where now you can actually request information from the Swedish government. How they deliver that to you is a very different question. They actually apply the law of the 1800s and deliver you a box full of printed out spreadsheets, but they will actually make that information available to you if you ask for it. So we talk about public records when we're talking about open source information. We talk about satellite imagery. Increasingly today, we can very easily access satellite imagery, which only 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago cost $2,000, $3,000 for one image, now costs about $20. So we can call that also open source information. And lots of providers, such as Google, such as Bing from Microsoft, other organizations as well, also make that satellite imagery available free online. And then what I'm going to mostly focus on, the kind of source of my work, social media content. So photos, text, videos, anything, memes posted online, that we can use to actually work out what's happening in a country, in a situation, in an event. And so why do we use it at Amnesty? Why do we actually rely on this? We pay a lot of researchers to go into the field and talk to people, so why are we also bothering with open source information? Well, as I'm sure you all know, so many places today are very, very difficult to access. And if you have an Amnesty business card in your wallet, or you're applying for a visa as an Amnesty researcher, there are a lot of places you won't get into. Governments don't like our reports. So even if we get in one time, we put out a report that the government doesn't like, we can't get in there again. We put out a report critical of the Cameroon government very recently. We've not had a visa to go into Cameroon for a very long time. I don't think we're going to get one anytime soon. So, doing research on Cameroon is very difficult for us, right? The new government in Brazil is already threatening to shut down Amnesty's offices in Brazil and throw us out of the country. So increasingly for either dangerous reasons, i.e. there's a conflict, so going into Yemen is very difficult, or going to parts of Yemen for us is very difficult. Or for administrative reasons. We can't get a visa, or we're not welcome in the country for whatever reason. We can't access a place, so we can actually use open source information to kind of replace that first-hand access that we would ideally have. We also use it as backup testimony. When I started out in my work, looking at open source information, kind of working through the challenges in 2009 of the Green Revolution in Iran, into the Arab Spring in 2010, 2011, 2012, everybody was saying, certainly in the journalism world, I wasn't so acquainted with the human rights world then, certainly everyone was saying in the journalism world, this social media, there's not even going to be need for journalists soon. Everyone will just be posting everything online, and we can just, tell our own stories that way. And actually, some news organizations cut back on their foreign coverage on the back of that, which was a massive mistake. I think today we know that social media content online is no panacea, is no silver bullet for all our woes of being able to report what's going on in the world. So we never rely solely on social media, or very, very, very rarely. I can think of less than 3 cases where Amnesty has said something based solely on social media. But where it is phenomenally useful is when our researchers are in the field interviewing people, and I can think of a case from Yemen where we managed to get one of our researchers into Aden in the south of Yemen. And she was interviewing internally displaced people, so people who'd moved from one part of the country to another because of conflict, basically internal refugees. And they were telling our researcher, I left this place because of a bombing. Or I left this place because the Saudi-led coalition bombed my village and all my 10 people in my family died, and it was time for us to actually say, we need to get out of here. So while she was in Aden interviewing people, she was WhatsApping me, sending me messages via WhatsApp and saying, I've just interviewed somebody who says they're from this village near Hodeidah, the town of Hodeidah in northwestern Yemen. And they told me that on the 1st of January, there was a bombing in their village by the Saudi coalition, and 10 people were killed, 3 children, etc. Can you verify this? Can you provide backup testimony to support these arguments? And we looked on social media, and we could. We were able to actually find the videos of that bombing on the day that the researcher was told it would happen, in the place that the researcher was told it was happened. And then our researcher then knew that the testimony from the person she'd spoken to was a lot more reliable than had she just got the testimony itself, because we know there's plenty of research done on this. Eyewitness testimony can often be very, very fallible. So if you can back that up with social media, open source content, it helps strengthen your argument. And the other time we use it is because there's literally nothing else. There's no other way for us to actually report on what's going on. If we look at the situation in 2017 in Myanmar, nobody could get into Rakhine State to see what the Burmese military was up to, right? So we had to rely on satellite imagery, and we had to rely on the mobile phone footage that people were carrying across the border from Rakhine State in Myanmar to Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. And they were some of the most important pieces of evidence that were actually used when the independent fact-finding mission on Myanmar published their report late last year to the United Nations. And a lot of that research was actually based on open source information, satellite imagery, and video footage as well. And without that, there was absolutely no other way that we could really understand the scale of what was happening in Myanmar at that time. So they're the 3 main reasons why Amnesty actually invests people, time, resources in actually doing open source investigations. And a couple of great examples, although I'm going to show one from the BBC, is how you can actually represent this. So, the re-education camps in Xinjiang province. BBC did a really amazing report just using satellite imagery. Hopefully this will play. There we go. On how these camps have actually changed. And if you scroll, this will scroll down a little bit. And we'll actually see, so we have where one of the camps is here in 2015. And the BBC did a great job here of then actually showing how that changed between 2015 and 2018. And that's something we do at Amnesty all the time, to look how areas change, look how using satellite imagery. There's no way we would be able to get to that part of China. The closest we can get is the border with Kazakhstan, where we've interviewed a lot of refugees, but actually getting to this place and seeing firsthand what's happening is basically impossible for us and for journalists as well. So we're actually able to use satellite imagery, or the BBC in this case, but it's something that we do a lot, actually use satellite imagery to show the difference in how things have changed over time. This is a big project as an example that Amnesty worked on. We published last October and worked with the Digital Verification Corps, our students on this, where we showed how. So we're obviously working a lot in Egypt with after the military coup in Egypt, but obviously, for Amnesty to influence the Egyptian government is very, very difficult. So we're always looking at new ways and new people we could probably influence and put pressure on to change their tactics. And one of those tactics is to target the countries who are selling weapons to the country which is committing human rights violations. So in this case, we're actually targeting the French government, who's selling a lot of weapons. I think they're the second biggest exporter of weapons to Egypt. And we were trying to put pressure on the French government to change their policies around weapons sales to Egypt. So we analyzed with the Digital Verification Core, and in particular the students at UC Berkeley and Toronto University, over 20 hours of video footage showing the repression of protests in Egypt to show how French weapons were involved in that. And the French government had sold weapons to Egypt with the sole purpose of being used in counterterrorism operations in the Sinai. So they were sold to the Egyptian military. But here we suddenly saw in the streets of Cairo French weapons being used by the Egyptian police to repress protest. And they were used in the Rabia massacre in 2014 when over 1,000 people were killed in one day. So we're using open source footage and videos of the Rabia massacre to show how French weapons were complicit, and ergo the French government was complicit in the repression of peaceful protests in Egypt. And that's something we were unable to do at scale without reverting to open source information. Another great example of how something found on open source can really influence the narrative, really influence what people think about a situation is this video which appeared from Cameroon in the summer of 2018, in July 2018. Cameroon is one of those conflicts that we at Amnesty consider a forgotten conflict. People really don't know very much about what's going on in Cameroon. It's a horrendous situation in the country which carries on to today. And this video suddenly appeared, which is probably the most horrendous video I've ever seen in my career. I'm not going to show you the video. Of 2 women and 2 children being marched down a path, a dusty path in northwestern Cameroon, and then executed by the Cameroon military, a so-called extrajudicial execution. They were accused of being Boko Haram members or Boko Haram sympathizers. They were unarmed, yet they were walked down without any trial or any due process and killed. We at Amnesty took this very seriously. We just saw this video. It was starting to go viral in Cameroon. And our researcher was sent it on a WhatsApp channel. And we basically dropped everything to start working on this video and verify this video. The 5 members of our team worked on this video for 3 days. And we put out this press release where we went through the video and said, this is credible evidence that the Cameroon army were committed an extrajudicial execution. And this was caught on video. The Cameroon government helped us out by saying this was fake news before even we put out our press release, which gave us something to respond to very nicely. But straight away, when this came out, we got a lot of media interested in this because everybody could see just how horrendous this video was. And it really helped us bring the situation in Cameroon to light. We see videos like this from Cameroon every day, but nothing quite to the level of 2 unarmed women and two unarmed children being taken down and summarily executed in the way they were. But actually putting the time and effort into that and pulling out all the little details of the video really helped us make that argument. And then some of you may have seen, and if you haven't, I would recommend you looking up the BBC did a real full-length investigation over 2 months into the video. It's called, if you search on Google for BBC Anatomy of a Killing, you'll pull up the 7.5-minute video, which really goes through step by step how this video was verified with the graphics and the advanced reporting that only the BBC can do. And another final example is how this can go really now to prosecutions on the international stage. And I think it was late 2017, the ICC put out its first arrest warrant based, for the most part, on open source information about this guy in Libya called Mustafa Werfeli. And they've actually put out an arrest warrant for this guy because of these videos that he posted online. And this is a video that appeared in 2018 at 7 o'clock in the morning, and we, again at Amnesty, spent the whole day verifying this video, finding the exact location where these happened so we could make sure that the ICC was aware of it, that the international community was aware of it, so that this could be added to the extra information. that was being used by the ICC in its arrest warrant. Unfortunately, Mr. Werfel is still at large in Benghazi in Libya, but the arrest warrant is still out for him at the ICC. And that's based really solely on videos that him and his followers put on their Facebook accounts. So there's really, now we're looking how open source information can be taken to the next level and used in criminal prosecutions. And that's something I think Lindsay and Ali will be working on at HKU over the coming term. So there are some of the great, if everything goes perfectly well, if everything goes right, if everything goes smoothly, this is what we can do, right? But what are the risks associated with this, right? So at Amnesty International, we're certainly not a very rich organization, even though we're probably one of the wealthier human rights organizations. But the biggest capital we have, as I like to say time and time again, is our reputation. So every time we put out anything like this, I feel, even though it's my job to go through and find this kind of content and work with our students to verify it, and check it and go through it and triple check it and really make sure. And I'm always phenomenally cautious and conservative about what we publish. Every time we publish something, I have about 3 days of feeling like nauseous, just in case we got it wrong. So far, touch wood, we haven't. But I think, keeping that fear is one of the reasons that we haven't got it wrong yet. So what are the risks of getting it wrong, right? Because even when we get it right, as we saw in the case of the Cameroon video, we're accused of spreading fake news. Yeah? We're accused of trying to meddle in other countries' affairs. So what about if we get it wrong, right? So we have at Amnesty something that we've called the Human Rights Violators Playbook, which I think is quite an important thing, quite an interesting thing, and funny thing as well at the same time to think about. So the 5 tactics of what we're accused of, even when we get it right, are our impartiality. Yeah, we're funded by George Soros. George Soros is there. We're part of a Rothschild Jewish conspiracy, and Amnesty International is just another puppet in the game, right? We're no way impartial. Yeah, even though Amnesty goes to great lengths to make sure we are impartial, and we're always questioning ourselves. And I've seen many things that probably were true that were not published because we were worried about not being seen as impartial. They also deny it completely. They pretend it didn't happen. And we've seen that a lot with Russia in particular, where they just kind of say, no, that didn't happen. It was someone else completely, If anybody who's interested in looking at Russia and open source investigations, they've put out some amazing stuff out there. They've put some amazing stuff out there to show that things didn't happen, In the UK with the Novichok attacks, the 2 guys who were just visiting Salisbury Cathedral because it was their dream to go and visit this cathedral. They weren't there to poison anybody, honest guys. It didn't happen, We see it all the time. This is probably my favorite, the whataboutisms. They ask, the what about question. It's like, yeah, but we might have done that, but what about them? What about, I don't know, Cameroon saying, what about what's happened in Nigeria? Well, we care about that as well, but we also care about what you're doing. And it's a very easy trap to fall into of responding to whataboutisms, which we try not to all the time. They simply attack us. They just say, they've actually gone out publicly and tried to attack Amnesty. We've seen it in India very recently, in particular, where Amnesty is being really attacked, and then finally with the risk of being shut down. So those are the 5 main tactics when we get it right that we're faced with. So if we get it wrong, the challenges for us are going to be amplified 1,000-fold and make our work a lot harder. So this is why we set up what we call the Digital Verification Corps, and there's 4 people in this room, well, 5 people including myself in this room in that picture, where we have now our 6 universities from all across the world, so Berkeley, Hong Kong, Toronto, Essex and Cambridge, where this photograph was taken, and Pretoria University in South Africa. And we have now a network of about 120 students who are trained in doing verification for Amnesty, whose work has actually been instrumental in, for instance, the Egypt project that I showed you, to actually be, for us to be able to really take advantage of the opportunities that social open source investigation and content and social media bring without falling into the trouble and the risks that I mentioned. So we have these students, they're an amazing bunch of students, and how I like to think of them is as the Amnesty-led writers of 2018 or 2019 as we are now. And that's actually was the genesis of the whole project, was us asking ourselves, well, Amnesty is a volunteer-led movement. You know, we see ourselves as a human rights movement, yet writing a letter today can be as simple as just, you know, clicking a button or just signing your name at the bottom of a template, right? It's not really very engaged. You know, I remember my mum hosting letter writing meetings on a Wednesday evening at our house around our kitchen table where people would come around and sit down and write letters for 2 hours. But if you can just click on something and print it, it's not really engaging. Yeah, we still want people to do it, but it's become what we call clicktivism, right? You can feel good by just clicking something. Yeah, it's like, oh, I'm really contributing to human rights all around the world. Click. I can do it 10 times in an hour. Click, click, click. Look at me, aren't I great? It's not really very engaging. So the DVC is our attempt to actually really build some engagement in people volunteering to work for an organization like Amnesty, while at the same time training people in skills that aren't necessarily yet given at university. Right? So people who want to work in human rights today, people who want to work in journalism today, actually need to know about how to find a video on social media, how to find a picture on social media, how to find content, written content on social media. They need to know that. And they also need to know how to verify it as well. So what we're doing with the students is, yes, benefiting from their labor and time for free, but at the same time having them learn skills which are actually going to make a difference in the job market. And then hopefully they will carry on working for human rights organizations, and we'll spread the skills amongst different human rights organizations or humanitarian organizations. And we're seeing that happen. We've had one DVC member actually come and work for Amnesty. We have another one who's going to work for a very large newspaper. We had other ones work for NGOs in the Netherlands and in Sweden. So we're actually seeing these skills actually filter out, and people who have these skills are actually seen now as more employable because NGOs, human rights organizations, news organizations know that they need people with these skills. So that's kind of the trade-off that we get. And we can also do things at scale. We're 5 people on our team who are tasked with looking at satellite imagery, looking at new ways of representing information, data visualization tools, a whole host of things. We're tasked with also training the organization. So going through 20 hours of videos from Egypt is impossible for our team. But with the students, who we train, we actually now have a capability to do this kind of work at scale that previously was impossible for us, and is allowing us to shed light on new things that otherwise we were unable to. And that's really seen in this is just some of our press release headlines from last year, where we see every single one of these the DVC has made a contribution to. Is what's the situation in Venezuela, the situation in Nicaragua, in the DRC ahead of the elections, in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon. Things that if you look at certainly Western European media, you never actually see these things reported, but our DVC students are actually working on them. And actually to see that, hopefully Yuki and Mozilla will talk about it later, but actually to see you doing this work and actually seeing a final result from it is also, I think, motivational to actually see a student learning something, but also having something they can put on their CV. So for us, it's massively important. So what does this kind of work look like? So, oops, I skipped a slide, sorry. So in about a year ago, it was actually exactly a year ago, the Turkish army decided that the town of Afrin in Syria, which had been a pretty stable place throughout the whole of the conflict, was playing host to the YPG, which Turkey considers, which is the Kurdish armed forces in Syria, which Turkey considers being basically in cahoots with the PKK. They kind of see them being one and the same thing. The PKK being a terrorist organization that's fighting for a Kurdish land within Turkey. So the Turkish army decided to cross the border into Syria and take the town of Afrin. So here you have a little map. So the north of the line there is Turkey, and the south of the line is Syria, and there you have Afrin in the middle. So we were a little bit worried about this. Obviously, you know, Amnesty as an organization doesn't comment on conflict, doesn't have a position on one country invading another. All that we demand is that if there is a conflict, that the conflicting parties follow the international law on armed conflict, basically follow humanitarian law. So we're always looking for monitoring for any violations of humanitarian law. So we were asked by our Syria researcher to discover and verify audiovisual content that corroborated interviews that our Syria researcher had done around civilian casualties. So we were looking particularly at civilian casualties since the incursion by the Turkish army in January 2018. This was also very difficult for us. For those of you who maybe know a bit of the history of Amnesty, at that time, the chairman of Amnesty Turkey was sitting in jail, and the director of Amnesty Turkey was sitting in jail as well. So the two heads of Amnesty Turkey were sitting in jail, one accused of being involved in the military coup of 2016, and the other accused of participating in a training workshop in Istanbul, which also, I can't remember, the charges were so spurious, it's just laughable if I tell you what they were. But just bear in mind that the two heads of Amnesty Turkey were sitting in a Syrian jail, in a Turkish jail, so we were very worried about putting out anything that could in any way put them in trouble. Obviously, we weren't going to not put something out because it was very important to do so, and Idil and Taner would have been horrified had we not. But we just had to be very, very cautious. So our team, they're based in Beirut, was able to identify several locations and events, but obviously they can't travel to that part of Syria. So they were doing the interviews via WhatsApp. You know, they weren't there, they weren't able to see anything firsthand, they were just getting interviews via WhatsApp. Okay. So those interviews look something like this. So we have, you know, somebody saying in the town of Gendres on the 23rd, the bombs started falling on us, the sound of explosions was terrifying, I didn't know what to do. In Azaz, we were sure we were under attack. We were attacked from Afrin under the control of the PKK. The attack injured 13 female patients in a hospital. In Rajo, we heard a warplane hovering above the village, and an hour later, around 10:30 p.m., the shelling started. And in Mabatli, several shells landed on a one-floor house where an Arab family of 6 IDPs from Idlib lived. Okay. So we're particularly interested in the Mabatli situation. So the shelling on Mabatli started yesterday, 21st of January 2018 at 1 p.m. Several shells landed on a one-floor house where an Arab family of 6 IDPs from Idlib lived. Okay. So the first thing we do, or we'd ask the students to do, is actually do research to find any content at all in a very wide net way, any content at all that could possibly be linked to Mabatli, 25th of January 2018, and this house that may have been shelled or hit by an airstrike, very unclear, by the Turkish military. So we found some pictures. We found a lot of pictures and a lot of videos, some of which are very gruesome. Don't worry, you won't see any gruesome pictures here. But this is kind of a sample of some of the images we found. And when you find these pictures, you're like, great, this potentially shows, you know, what I'm being told it is. Hey, but if we didn't do any verification, or we didn't know about verification, the temptation would be, well, they say it's Mabatli, they say it's this, you know, we've used Google Translate to translate the Arabic into English. Let's just go for it. No. What we have to do is to make sure that this really is Mabatli. Okay? And what we do to do that is we carry out something we call geolocation. Right? Geolocation is just a fancy word for saying finding out where it is on a map. And to do that, we go through all the smallest possible features in those pictures to try and work out exactly where it is. And when you start verification, that can seem very, very daunting. But actually, doing it for a while, it starts to become a bit easier, if not remaining somewhat daunting. So in this case, we pull out as many of the details as we can. So for instance here, we have a building in the background. We have a wall, and we have a flattened roof, okay? And that, if you've never thought about this before, probably seems ridiculous, right? How the heck can somebody at Amnesty find that by just those features on land? Obviously, what I'm going to show you in 15 minutes of a presentation took a few hours, right? It takes time. It takes time, but anybody can do this, even if it does seem crazy looking now. So, but what you do is you take all these features, you pull out all these features, and then compare them to freely available satellite imagery of an area. So in kind of typical, here's one I made earlier fashion, by comparing all those features, we could actually work out exactly where that took place. So the garden wall there is a yellow arrow, honestly. The most important thing is that big circle in red, where we have the building in the background. And there you can see in the circle in green, the building that was actually hit by the shelling where the family of 6 lived. We also found pictures of the family, including the children. And what you can do now with modern satellite imagery is, this isn't open source. Sometimes we go and pay for satellite imagery. But this was a building in December 2017 on satellite imagery. Okay, you can see the kind of L-shaped building in the red square there. And then we can go and compare that to the satellite imagery from late January 2018, where if we put the same building side by side, we can actually see on satellite imagery now exactly where the building was destroyed, right? If you look at on the left-hand side of the image on the right, you see the kind of roof where it's collapsed, right? It's a little bit darker. So there, yeah, sure. How do I do that? There we go. So this is where actually the bomb hit and the building collapsed on the family, compared to there where it's now fully constructed. Right? So by going through that, we can then actually feel confident of putting in our press release, hundreds of civilian lives at risk as Afrin offensive escalates, and we can say, Amnesty's digital verification cause analysis was consistent with some of the testimonies received from residents in Afrin and Azaz. The digital verification call, and this is one we looked at, was able to independently confirm this deadly attack in Malbatli, right? So without that, we would never be able to make those claims with such conviction and such strength, which would open us up then a lot more to the human rights violators playbook, which we're trying to avoid as much as possible by making our arguments as strong as possible. Now, obviously that comes with, again, this is one of the situations where everything comes together really nicely and really perfectly. I'm going to finish just by talking to you about some of the challenges I see in this area. The one thing I worry about, and we're very aware of at Amnesty a lot, is the potential traumatic effect on researchers of doing this kind of work. There is, it can be very, very, very tiring sitting in Hong Kong, in London, in Berlin, in Berkeley, completely removed from repressive human rights situations, looking at videos of conflict, looking at videos of war, looking at videos or photos or reading information about the worst that humanity can do to each other. So it's something we take a lot of care about. in organizations. It's taken a long time, I think, for the human rights movement to understand that it's important for us to care about ourselves. There's often been a lot of guilt associated with human rights work. Who am I as a white 40-year-old English man, the most privileged person on the planet, to feel bad about looking at, the situation of people in Sudan? Why can, they have it far worse than I could ever have it. How dare I feel bad about their situation? How dare I feel upset when they have it so bad? While that, I think, is something we certainly have to be aware of, if I'm traumatized, if I have post-traumatic stress disorder, or if I'm burnt out, or if I'm feeling very upset, so I drink a bit too much, whatever, I'm no use to anybody as a human rights researcher, right? I'm not helping anybody if I'm not doing my job properly. So we, just for that simple reason, we are very aware and starting, at least in the human rights movement, a lot more to ask these questions about, are we okay? Are we resilient, most importantly? And can we have these conversations about mental health, which have been very hard conversations to have? And the movement, I think, is starting to ask those questions. It's taken a long time, but we're starting to get there. But we're certainly very aware also of the risk of vicarious trauma, and we work very hard with our students, in particular, to make sure that they have the tools and the abilities and the resilience not to be affected too badly by this kind of work, and be able to actually take it forward. The other challenge that we're faced with a lot is the challenges of disappearing content, right? People put things on the internet for a whole host of reasons, but then things often disappear from the internet as well. So if we're doing open source investigations, you're very much at the whim of who put things online, and you're at the whim of privately listed companies based in the United States whose motive is to make money, right? So we can rattle and shout as much as we want at Facebook and YouTube, but to be honest with you, unless it's going to affect their bottom line, they're not going to really listen to us. Now, Facebook is starting to listen because their bottom line has been very affected by the Cambridge Analytica scandal. But increasingly, content disappears. The social media companies are under pressure from especially Western European governments about extremist content online and people being converted in Europe to extremism, violent extremism. And rightly so. We don't want extremist propaganda online. But who's making the decision what's extremist propaganda and what's a video of a human rights violation? And the Syrian Archive, which is an organization based in Berlin, who set up with the goal of sourcing all the of archiving all the open source content possible from the Syrian conflict over the last 8 years coming up to, lost 400,000 videos overnight in the summer of 2017 because YouTube were told to take them down, and they built an algorithm which just took down what it thought was extremist content, even though a lot of that was actually human rights violations by the Assad regime. So that's something we work on a lot to make sure that we have a resilient and a strong archive of all the content, because otherwise it all disappears all too quickly. And, it may not be for nefarious reasons, right? It could just be that somebody decides to take down that video because they don't want it online before, or they're getting a lot of interest online and they didn't really know because they've only had 100 followers on their Twitter account, and they just put a video up there, and suddenly they're being contacted by all and sundry, and they're like, oh my God, I better just make my account private. So one of the first things we always make sure we do when we find content is to archive it, is to take it down. And then the final big challenge I see on the horizon, talking about two challenges that are very contemporary, but one challenge which I think is going to hit us all in the face very soon, whether you're interested in human rights or not, I think is something we all need to be aware of, is the big risk of deepfakes or synthetic media. Deepfakes is a popular term for basically videos built through algorithms, videos built through putting training data into an algorithm and creating faces. One of these pictures of Barack Obama here is a fake. I don't even know which one anymore. I did know at one point. But if you look at them, it's very, 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 very hard to see. And this is, technology is only getting better. It's only getting better. And very soon we'll be able to create videos of anybody saying anything, anywhere, which I think is a very, very deep risk for democracy, full stop, not just human rights investigation. Because if you look at, for instance, this kind of algorithm, and hopefully this will play, there we go. This is an algorithm that was created. This is a film. One of these films is one of these is real, and one of them is created by a computer, of just somebody driving down a road in the United States, one either in winter or in summer, and then using an algorithm to change the seasons. Right? Now, I think if you study that carefully, probably you won't be able to see on this resolution of screen. If you studied it carefully, you would know, you'd be able to work out today that the one on the right is the algorithm-produced one, and the one on the left is the real filmed one. But it's not easy. Huh? It's not easy. It takes you a little time to go through it, look at it a few times. So that's where we are. So I see, deep fakes and synthetic media as something we really, really have to be aware of. I'm going to stop there. But yes, I don't know if you want to.
Thank you. I do want to take questions, but I want to have Herion and Yuki and Mozilla just share for a few minutes of your experience working with the DVC, because I know that you guys are interested in sharing as well. So you can share from back there if you would like, or you can come up here, wherever you guys would like to sit. But if you do sit from back there, make sure you press your red button. If you want to come up here.
Oh, I start. Hi, everyone. My name is Mozilla Sosa. I just graduated from UC Berkeley in the spring, and that's where I first got involved with the DVC. And I'm now working here as a research assistant with HKU's DVC. So I think for me, just a very quick kind of narrative of how I got there is I wanted always to go into journalism, because in my mind, kind of like Sam spoke about, that was how change was kind of facilitated. You would take a picture of something and you would show the government or the people, and action would come about. But I became increasingly disenchanted with that, living in like the modern age where Facebook is how we get our news, or at least my generation. And when I came to Berkeley for my senior year, I learned about the DVC, and that seemed to kind of be the nexus, or the next wave, the next chapter in kind of citizen movements and information bringing about change, especially when you look at it with the legal approach, as you spoke about with the recent ICC case. It was really appealing and interesting to me. And my work with the DVC takes that to the next level. It was everything I wanted it to be, and more, honestly, because on my first day, for example, I'll never forget, I was in the library, and the New York Times front page story was on Myanmar and what was happening. They had a really in-depth piece on it. And I went to my first day of the DVC, and via Skype, Sam comes on and tells us and our project manager that our first project for the year was going to be on Myanmar. And via his guidance and all the things that we were doing there, I was able to I was really just lucky, to be honest, because the one video, a lot of what you do is really hard because you're not actually able to verify it. But the video that I was assigned was verifiable. And then 2 weeks later, or not 2 weeks later, a month later or so, it was in an Amnesty report that made its way all the way up to important people, which was really exciting to kind of see. One day the newspaper, us working on it for a couple of weeks, and then some sort of tangible action item come out of it was really inspiring. And because it's such a new, engaging startup space, you're able to kind of give feedback and engage with your instructors and your teachers in a way that I think is really empowering as a student, to be able to focus on something that you think needs more change. I realized that there wasn't really a community in the Berkeley context of the DVC. We were working really hard, but there wasn't as much of a community there. So I was able to go speak to my supervisors and Sam was on board to kind of create more community time for community, because that helps with the psychosocial stuff that he spoke about. I'll pass it on.
Hi, I'm Yuki, and I joined the DVC program last year when it first started at HKU. The first project we did is on the Syria chemical attack in 2014 spring, and we're first assigned with around 28 videos that we have to verify in a team of about 12 to 15 persons in our group. Basically it was really hard for us because at first the town that we're going to verify on is actually Cafecita. It's really something very new to us. It's really far from us because it's an orphan town in Syria. And we basically have to do a background search first to figure out the timeline of different series of chemical attack and the boom attack in that year and in that period of time. And also we actually have to geolocate the exact hospital that were attacked, that were, and the exact time and date that they actually, the hospital was destructed. So we use Google Earth Pro and different, we check into the satellite imagery to check when exactly they were destructed and the extent of the destruction. And also we have to cross-reference and check different reports published by different organizations, and they may have something different and something even conflicting. So we actually have come up with quite a lot of questions with Lindsay, and we actually talk about that with Sam as well. And in the end, we have submitted our final report with a team of 12 person of us on the whole DVC project of HKU last year. So we submitted to Syrian Archive, which is the collaborating partner last year with us. And it was really motivational, as what Sam has mentioned, and because they actually use our report. And I think it was the first significant project that HKU DVC had last year. So pass the time to Herion.
Hi, my name is Herion. I'm a PCLL student at HKU, and I did DVC work last year when I enrolled in Lindsay's class, which was solely on DVC. And I was lucky enough to have the chance to go to Cambridge to attend the DVC Summit that happened in June 2018 last year. So the four of us went with Lindsay to attend the summit, which was a collaboration between all universities that are working for Amnesty on DVC. It's a knowledge exchange opportunity for us to talk to each other and to learn of more ways to improve our structure for doing DVC work in the future. So mainly we had small group discussions. There were sharings by some expert speakers. Some of those are real researchers in the field, so that we as students learn more about how they actually do work, and we know more about the skills and tactics and the tools that they used. And there was also a verification collaboration with other universities, which we as Hong Kong U students find very helpful, because we are the newest uni to be on board in the project, and we really felt that we have to improve our workflows, the structure, in terms of communication or the tools that we use, or even how we present our findings. So all these things were new to us, and we find it a very good opportunity to be able to interact with people, with students who have been doing it for a few years and have been quite successful, so that we could improve our DVC lab in Hong Kong U. And that's about it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you guys for sharing. So I'd like to open it up now for questions. You guys, I know we're running over a little bit, and we started a little bit late, so obviously if someone has to leave, we understand. And if any of you have questions, we're happy to answer any questions. If you do have a question, just please press the button in front when you go to use the microphone. Questions? Or for any of our students, do you have any questions? Yeah, Johnson.
Hi, I'm Johnson from Clean Clothes Campaign. Thank you for your sharing. So the internet is very noisy. Instead of verifying one source only, which is already difficult, it is even more difficult to decide which source to verify. Because one of the countermeasures that I can imagine for human rights violator is when they were going to have another human rights violation, they would just flood the internet with a lot of fake news, fake videos, or even videos that were real but happened like years before. So how do you, what is the procedures or screening procedures of the team, and how do you decide which to verify things?
So it's a really good question. So to recap, it's what you see. So, I'll start my answer again. So what we see, it really depends on the violation that you're trying to monitor, right? Some violations, like the Cameroon violation, for instance, you get one piece of content and you're praying for another piece of content, but it's not going to happen in an event like that, right? Because you have, that is what we call a perpetrator video. So for some very strange reason, somebody who's committed a violation likes to be filmed doing it, right? They were filming it for their collection in some way. And then somehow it managed to leak out of the tight group that it was in, and then became a public thing. We have a theory as to why, but that's for another story. Verifying that obviously becomes a lot harder, and in some ways a lot riskier, because if you only have one video, you really, really have to be sure about what you know, but also very importantly about what you don't know. And I think one thing I've certainly learned in this work is you have to be really transparent. It's more important to be transparent about what you don't know almost than what you do know. In bigger events, it becomes a bit harder. That's when you see the noisiness. So if I think of, for instance, 2 years ago, there was supposed to be elections in the Democratic Republic of Congo that didn't happen, and Joseph Kabila was supposed to stand down. He didn't. On the day he was supposed to stand down, there were massive protests. There were calls for massive protests across the DRC, which didn't happen because there was an incredibly large police clamp down on protests. So anybody who tried to even start protesting was arrested very quickly. So what happened was the internet was flooded with videos of previous protests, because it was almost as if people saying, we can't go out and protest, but if we were allowed to go out and protest, this is what it would look like. Which I can understand why people do that, but for Amnesty is very dangerous, right? The temptation. So the first thing we ever do with a piece of content we find like that is to try and find out if it's appeared online before. Because that actually siphons out, I would say, 95% of misinformation. And we do a very simple technique called reverse image search on frames from a video or from a photograph to see if it's appeared online before. You've probably seen it in other situations. Every time there's a hurricane hits the United States of America, we see pictures of sharks in Miami or wherever, right? They're never fake, but you also see they're never real, but it's the same one that gets regurgitated every single time, and people fall for it with every single time, which is even more worrying. So the first thing we ever do is do that, and then if we don't get a result, we'll actually then invest time trying to verify things, because yes, reverse image search will tell you if it's appeared online before, but it won't help you. It could still be an old video which just hasn't been online before, right? It's very hard to prove a negative. So we can then go through the whole process, which I showed you with the Afrin. So trying to work out exactly where that shark was in Miami. Which street corner was it on? Are there any shadows which could help us work out what time it was filmed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's then we go into the more in-depth steps. Tumbleweed. Yeah.
We'll wait with quiet silence until someone has another question. Sam, I do have a question about, so sometimes people ask us in the DVC, what's the vision beyond now? You have these first 6 schools on board. Where is the DVC going to go from here? And I know there's the value of having students involved and seeing where they grow out, but what do you see as the next?
I think the long-term vision of the DVC is that the DVC doesn't exist. because organizations actually know how to do this work and universities actually teach this work. And I think it's really important that, I think Masato from the journalism school here, you teach this kind of work in your school right now. But I think it's really important not only in journalism but in applied human rights, masters, for instance, that this kind of work is taught, but also that organizations everywhere kind of have the skill set to do that. I think we're a long way off the DVC not needing to exist. What I would like to see is, our university partners not just work with Amnesty, and we're seeing that with Berkeley, and we're seeing that with the University of Essex now, where University of Essex is also taking the first steps in doing this, where they work with other human rights organizations, not Amnesty, which to assist them as well. And that's something Amnesty absolutely supports. And we're happy to also provide our resources to help in that way. So I would ideally see the kind of DVC network expanding in that way, and also expanding geographically to include, we don't have a partner in Latin America, for instance. We don't have a partner in the Middle East and North Africa, for instance. So, we'd like to make sure it's a project which expands, but doesn't expand in Northern Europe and North America. So that's kind of where we see it going. Yeah. Pleasure.
That you're doing. I'm a digital activist in the LGBTIQ space. So my question is also with regard to activism and how increasingly different encryption or non-encryption, that seems to also be going in the last rate. So a lot of things at the moment related to Russia, for instance, we support the Russian Computer Network.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the Chechen breaking out this week. There are WhatsApp kind of conversations, but even there's some doubt about the safety of the conversations, or in another context, Syrian women is another one at the moment. But is there a sense of how to trust or what sources of social media tools activists should be using, particularly in a collaborative regional sense where they're trying to communicate to each other? Is there a response to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very hard, right? Especially in Russia, for instance, the pressure the activists must be under. I can't even imagine how hard it must be. And we know that they're being surveilled. It's definitely the case. So people really, really, really have to be careful. But it's about evaluating the risks in a proper way, right? You can't just run away from it all, right? You still have to be involved. So it's about being very careful and understanding the different ways you need to operate. So, certainly for an activist in a high-risk country, our advice would be to make sure that you have 2 phones, for instance, and you have one phone which is clean, a cheap Android phone which has absolutely no data on it that could be connected to you as an individual. So the recommendation is, you create a brand new Gmail, use an Android, create a brand new Gmail account with a completely anonymous name. You never put anything personal on that in any way. You only use, ideally, Signal, not even WhatsApp. If that's safe, because in some countries, if you're found with Signal on your phone, you'll then become a person of interest in inverted commas, where if you're using WhatsApp, that's what everybody uses, so it's okay. So those kind of steps really need to be taken. People need to be using VPNs where it's legal, of course. Obviously, that's a problem in Russia. And really trying to cover themselves in whatever way they can within their network. And then those networks, those groups, need to be very carefully policed as well, right? As soon as groups start getting too big, my mate Sergey's mates, whoever, can he come in or can she come in? Then you've got to start being very, very concerned, because I'm sure, for instance, that Cameroon video just happened to be, a soldier was in a group where somebody was like, oh my God, that's horrendous, let's take that video out of the group. So that can be dangerous. Also, the network or your group is only as safe as the weakest link, right? So everybody needs to be following the same protocols. Everybody needs to have the same, which is hard, which is really, really hard to do. The other thing I would say that often doesn't get thought about is if those groups or people are safe and they're able, within the remits of the risk that they're happy to take, is that they also learn how to capture and share content, if they want to, in a way that makes it usable for organizations like Amnesty. In ways that make it easy for me to do my job. So if you're filming a protest, for instance, don't just focus in on the person being beaten up. It's like a horrible way, but also make sure you take pictures of any landmarks around it that help us say, guys, this was definitely in Volgograd, or this was definitely in places we've never been, but help us actually verify that content. There's also ways of sharing content encrypted via WhatsApp, so it doesn't lose any of its data. If you just share a picture via WhatsApp, it loses all the metadata associated with the image. But you can actually share it as a document, and then it doesn't lose any of the metadata. So it's kind of understanding all those techniques and investing some time in those. Final point on that is there's an organization in the US called Witness, and they've developed a tool called the Video as Evidence Guide, which really takes people through the best way to film a protest safely, but also that it can be used in other ways. So their documentation could be really helpful for your network.
I love that you make the comment about taking pictures in ways that you can see the signs or whatever, because the students at the end of the semester last year said, I'm going to take my pictures in such a different way now. And I'm going to record videos where I'm actually in them so you can tell where it is and when it's taken. It's fun to see their even personal behavior change based on what they've learned through the program, which is really a unique thing to see. So thank you to all of you for coming today. It's a great pleasure to share this project with you, and please do reach out. Lydia in the back has created the wonderful Human Rights Hub webpage, which we are not launching until February, but you can check it out on the CCPL website. But we are creating a presence online for this project, and we'll have a link so that if you have requests or want to work with students on these projects, they will already have been trained and they will be doing this as part of our Human Rights Investigation Clinic. Please do reach out. We are very excited to have partnerships, and Ali in the back is in New Zealand but here for 3 weeks and also working with us on this project and helping us develop the Asia Pacific regional network. So thank you all for being here, and thank you, Sam, for speaking, and to Herion and Yuki and Mozilla, thank you for sharing your experience. See you guys soon.